get started, and then it will be being recorded. So those who are just arriving or if they want to review it later, you will be able to. So welcome on behalf of OTAC to a town hall meeting on the Occupational Therapy and Physical Therapy School Services Credential Initiative. And in terms of with OTAC, obviously OTAC really is our partner who's working on behalf of all of us as occupational therapy practitioners and ensuring that advancement of our profession. So. And then with me today, you'll see their faces soon, but we have Jennifer Snyder, and she's with Capital Advocacy. Capital Advocacy is the firm that OTAC works with, right? That partners with us in all those bills and initiatives that that we try to pass. Dr. Erin Dolan is an occupational therapist, and then with her EDD in education. And she has been part of this credentialing initiative for many moons, and you'll hear a little bit about her story. Dr. Rena Katrick is an occupational therapist who will talk about her perspective on the credentialing initiative and provide some updates. And myself, I'm Lisa Testa. I'm one of the co-chairs of the school-based subcommittee. So welcome. And just a little bit, just to see what we're doing. We'll take questions after. I see, Susan, you had a question. We will take questions towards the end. So relevance, we're going to talk a little bit about the credentialing initiative. We'll go through the history, why a school credential, and we're going to be really providing a lot of time for questions and answers. And we've switched around last minute this agenda. So the questions and answers will be at the latter part of the meeting. And we'll talk about the call to action at the prior to that. So a little bit of a background. What is a credential and why are we looking at this credentialing initiative? And just to give a little bit of context, we obviously, I know there's some physical therapists on the call today, and there's also occupational therapists. We are professionals. We're considered qualified personnel when you look at the ed codes that are prescribed, but within that educational system, they have a body that sets standards set by the California teaching. And so that set of standards is a set of standards, and it looks like you'll see when we look at our history in terms of when those were established, I believe it was around 1970, and you'll look at that set of standards that they have looked at. So some of the people that have those base kind of credentials, speech and language pathologists, adaptive physical educators, counselors, psychologists, social workers, nurses, teachers. So in addition to whatever license they might hold by their professional board, they're also then have a credential, and we'll talk about what that credential does. As occupational and physical therapists, we don't have that ability to have a credential. So a little bit of background, the best that we can, oh goodness, so it formatted, we apologize, we'll fix the formatting when it downloaded. It looks like the format got a little bit piece, but best we can tell, back in 1990, and when as occupational and physical therapists, we were in the public schools, but primarily we were working under Department of Health, under California Children's Services. And so for many, especially the larger districts, occupational therapists really weren't in providing services. Most of the services that we were providing were for individuals that were clients of CCS. And so, whoops, Rena?
Yes, trying to just help with the formatting. Is that all right, Lisa?
No, because I'm in the middle of it.
Okay, never mind. Sorry.
Sorry, so anyhow, so just in terms of little bit of that, and those who know, I think around I've been in the public schools for over 30 years in a couple of the larger school districts. So LA Unified, San Bernardino, and Long Beach actually had class action suits that were filed against them because we weren't providing services to all of the students with autism, et cetera, who needed it. And so that's really when you look at the history of why our programs were developed in some of these larger school districts, is that we weren't really fulfilling those obligations of IDIA. And IDIA was reauthorized in 2004. When you start to look at education, you look at our roles, certainly working under that motor domain, but occupational therapy having a place on the table under social participation, adaptive skills, et cetera. So we'll talk a little bit more about that and how has our roles changed as of what we can provide. How do we support those multi-tiered systems of support? How do we provide tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 interventions? And those who are on the call are not familiar with it. I know Dr. Bissell is also on the call today, but the guidelines for physical and occupational therapy in the California public schools can be accessed on CBOT. And the 2012 is the most current edition, and it does have a really nice overview of what is our role and nice examples in the public schools. In 2015, we partnered to address the OTPT school credential initiative. There were surveys that were conducted at the time. There was support from all of you and our what we call our stakeholders, so occupational therapists, practitioners, physical therapists, and then as we reached out to other professional colleagues. So sorry. So then there was a work group formed. Assembly bill to form a credential. The bill passed in assembly. And this is where, if we need later, Jennifer Snyder, who's on the call, can talk about what happens when you're trying to pass a bill. So the intent at that time, because of, we assume there will be some questions today, there were some questions, right? What happens? How do we have this? How do we allow this pathway for an occupational therapist or a physical therapist to become credentialed? And we'll look at this. So one pathway is directing the CTC to just act upon it, which can happen. It was something we explored years ago. Some of the barriers to that, there's no money set aside for doing that. So the decision at the time, with the information we knew, was to have an assembly bill, and that assembly bill would form a work group who would look at all of those factors. What's our background? What kinds of classes do we have? What's our core educational piece? So that passed the first part. There were some, as you know, occupational and physical therapists, variety of employment practices. So people are part of unions, not part of unions, certificated, classified. So variety of places. So there were some concerns coming from the CSEA, which is for some occupational therapists, they're under that union. And then in 2020, obviously COVID happened, just given kind of all the priorities at the time and making sure that we were really safe in terms of what we were doing, priorities to make sure that can we do telepractice, telehealth, what are those pieces? That changed, right? So that everything was on pause. At this point, we're up again and really looking at it. And the step was to go back and look at why not go directly first to the CTC. So that's where we're at now. Of the CTC, again, I know we're using a lot of acronyms, but is the California, it's the credentialing, right? California Teachers Credentialing, when you look at that. So now we're looking at that call to action. In December, and partnering, Tyne Sloan is the chair of the commission, and it's going through that history, right? To consider this, that you don't need to do this. You have that authority as the commission to be able to identify that occupational therapists and physical therapists meet that criteria. And then
So in a moment, Erin's going to be speaking more about what the requirements are for this school-based credential. But currently, we believe that OTs and PTs professional training meets the requirements for the services credential, and that currently we're unable to obtain such a credential. And a credential would not only signify an elevated level of professionalism within the educational system, it would validate our status as the highly qualified related services providers that we are, but it would also open additional pathways. So next slide. So what would a services credential allow me to do that we cannot do now? So certainly we can continue to practice and provide services directly to students as we have been. But what a services credential will do is give us access to an array of other positions within the school district. There's a lot of support in classroom and administrative and leadership positions that require a basic or an administrative credential. And currently we are not able to access that. So by allowing OTs and PTs to get that services credential, we would be eliminating and minimizing barriers so that we can provide our professional expertise, and our knowledge will be applied in a broader context.
So talking about this credential and looking at, again, why the credential, to have access to, as Rena was just saying, apply our broad scope of knowledge and being able to impact that system. And those decisions are made by leaders who are sitting at the table and having conversations about doing things that are really good for our students. And who's at the table are SELPA directors. That's our SELPA, our special education local plan area. They have an impact on how programs are organized and what services, how things are unfolding in the districts. The director of special education, program specialists, our inclusion specialists, our transition program directors, preschool program specialists, our autism coordinators. All of these individuals have the opportunity to sit at the table and have dialogue and discourse about how to disseminate programs, processes, elements that can have a huge impact on the way that we as service providers, we as OTs in the field working every day with kids can do more for those individuals. And these decisions have an impact on us as practitioners directly. I don't know about you, but I know in my role in school-based practice, I love working directly with the kids, but isn't it amazing when you can talk the same language with the teacher and you can have a big impact, not in just one classroom with one child, but through a program you implement at a school site, or through being able to be part of how multiple teachers implement the strategies and suggestions that you've been able to apply. That allows you to effectively use your time more intensively with those that need it. And those decisions that are being made, we're not at that table to have those conversations. I think the next slide. So why a services credential? Well, there are lots of different credentials. I know when I first was a new practitioner and got into the educational system, and even still when I talk with OTs in the school-based system, they say, well, why would we need a credential? I don't want to be a teacher, but there are so many different types of credentials, which we were just hearing about, and a services credential would meet that base credential that would allow us to have a bigger impact as we do our daily jobs, to be able to support the families, the children, the teachers that we serve. And it would allow us a voice to bring that unique value of what we provide as occupational therapy practitioners into the school setting, as physical therapists into the school setting. We have a really unique skill set. In fact, my other half, he's a recovering school psychologist, but as we got to know each other, he said, what do you do again? You're an OT. Wow, you know a lot of stuff. You kind of like know all that stuff that a school psychologist, knows, and other stuff too. I mean, not everything, obviously, we're not school psychologists, but he was really surprised as we were having conversations how much knowledge we as OTs actually have. And I think that that speaks volume to what we can bring to the table. And then I know that if we have the ability to bring this information, districts could see the value, and it might increase the ability of districts to recruit, to hire, and to really retain highly qualified therapists. I know Lisa mentioned, Dr. Tess mentioned that I would tell my story. I've been practicing as an OT for a little over 20 years, and a bulk of my practice has been in the schools. And I really wanted to have an impact on the system. We were inundated, didn't have enough OTs. And I don't know, I was dehydrated. My brain fell out of my ear one day, but it seemed like a good idea to go back to school. And I wanted to pursue my doctorate in education and in organizational leadership to really understand that system. And as I went through my doctoral program and got out, and I thought, okay, and there was a chance to apply for leadership positions, I learned that even with my doctorate, I wasn't able to because I didn't have what's considered to be a base credential. I didn't have the currency that allows me to have a pathway in the system within I work and that I can have an impact in. And I was kind of, there was nothing more that I could do. I love working with the kids. But at the same time, if I wanted to pursue my own professional development and growth, I didn't have a pathway to do that. And I know not every therapist out there is going to want to do that, but if there are those that do want to do that, should we then have the pathway and the opportunity to do that to make it better for all of our kids and for our profession? So it really is a way to open new opportunities and have equity in comparison to those other fields and professions like school psychologists, speech therapists, even school nurses. We don't have the ability to have that equity at this point, and exploring this pathway is a very fruitful way to do that. It gives us that opportunity.
So the services credential is the specific credential we're looking at. It's a specialization in clinical or rehab services, and it would authorize the holder to perform at all grade level service approved by the commission and designated on the credential. So that's the definition. Right now, that's the service. The services credential is the one that speech and language, audiology, hearing, some of those other services are able to access. And as Erin was speaking to, have that mobility within the system, both laterally and moving up. So that those professions right now, when they have that services credential, can have that level of self-determination within their programs, where speech therapists can run a speech therapy department or audiologists can run an audiology department. And that is not something available to us right now. So next slide. The requirements right now for getting that services credential, according to the CTC, include a baccalaureate or a higher degree from an institution approved by the commission, and a 5th year or its equivalent of college or university education, and specialized in professional preparation as the commission may require.
Okay, Jennifer.
So hi, everybody. So I'm going to add a little bit to what's been discussed related to the rehab services credential, and maybe take a few minutes and give you a sense of where we are right now with our outreach and our initiative. So, as this slide explains, we do believe that the clinical rehab services credential is the best fit. And Erin did a very nice job of saying, why we feel that many OTs and those OTs that have an interest should have the capability of getting a services credential for many reasons, if not just solely having the ability then to get an administrative services credential, if not anything else. And so we are very strong in our belief that we think that both OTs and PTs really are prepared already with the needed training to qualify for the credential. We also believe that if the CTC, as part of their requirement, determine what additional needs there might be to to have OTs and PTs qualify for this type of credential. And we think that it would be fairly minimal. But the statute, as folks alluded to earlier, does require the CTC to kind of go through that process of deciding, is there additional minimal requirements of related to maybe education training or otherwise that an OT or PT might need to do. So in the last couple of years, what we have done, at least through the legislature, and now what we've asked the CTC to do is really kind of look at how to look at what those qualifications would be and answer some of the questions that have come up with respect to, is there a viability to this credential being optional? Both the commission and other types of interest groups have said that they don't support that. We have the School Employees Association saying that they do. And so that really puts us as association in between really two different stakeholder groups. And that has hindered our ability to have success with this initiative. And so what we're really trying to do is to push the process along that the CTC already must do, for them to kind of put together a work group and answer some of those questions and really determine as a stakeholder group what the best avenue is for OTs and PTs within this type of services credential. And so that's where we're at right now, and I'll stop there because I think we're going to talk a little bit more as we move forward here, exactly kind of what our official ask was of the CTC.
Sure, that was really essential.
So yes, so this is our current group of members that serve on the commission. They are appointed members. They change every few years. You'll see the first woman that's there with the really great colors. I like those primary colors, the red jacket with the scarf on. She is the chair, the current chair of the commission. It's a great variety of teachers, other types of educators, and even services and counselors, service personnel, counselors, and other types. So a real broad variety. They are throughout the state. And again, as I mentioned, we have now sent a letter to the CTC saying, we really would appreciate you taking leadership and putting together a stakeholder group, of which they would be required to do anyway, if they were entertaining this idea, even if the legislature asked them to bring our representatives together with representatives of the School Employees Association, the Teachers Association, and other important stakeholders to talk through what would be the requirements and what the concerns are of those constituency groups.
Great. So a little bit dovetailing, and we're going to put this into this link. We'll have it in the chat. And we'll be answering some questions, but we've created, right, a letter that you can personalize and send to that chairperson of the CTC saying this is an important initiative. We would like you to address it. Right now, we've asked the CTC meets on a consistent basis. They have a meeting, upcoming, but their meeting after that's in June. So right now we've asked to be on the agenda in their June meeting. So that's currently what our ask is. We also certainly, as everyone knows, sometimes who you know does make a difference. So if you, when you later, and we're going to be posting, this will be posted on the OTAC webpage, but later when you look at that, you might be, wow, I know who that commissioner is. And maybe that's really an opportunity to talk about what you do as an occupational or physical therapist and how you might impact the educational system. Anyone else want to add on this slide?
I would just add, Lisa, that I think folks need to understand how important it is for the CTC to hear individually from occupational therapists that have an interest. I think they've heard from us And, we will plan to testify during public comment, at their next upcoming meeting. But I do believe that they really need to hear from more than just the association. So just want to emphasize that activity here will make a big difference in our efforts to be successful.
Right. Thank you. And then this, obviously, all of you on the call, not all of you, but many of you are OTAC members. So really the work of Jennifer is on behalf of OTAC. And even last week, there was a telehealth, it was advocacy week. There was a couple really important bills on the table. OTAC membership has so many positive outcomes. So maybe you're a member, but maybe your colleague isn't. So ask your colleague to join. Okay, so Rena.
And I'll speak again to the letter as it was mentioned, but we've tried really hard to make this very simple and very quick for you. If you go to this link, it's essentially a very short form where you'll enter your name and information, and you can add more, which is optional, but it will generate a letter that gets emailed directly to the CTC. And as Jennifer said, we are looking at trying to get on their June agenda. So now is the moment to really have a push for this letter writing campaign. And you can take this link, you can share it with your colleagues that you think may be interested, but it will really take 1 minute of your time. And if we do it in bulk, we'll have, a stronger impact in terms of them hearing our voice and seeing that we really care about this issue.
Great. Okay, I'm going to stop screen sharing, and we will take questions. And you can certainly, I know that there was a question initially, someone had their hand up when we first started, but certainly you can put on your videos now. We'd love to see our colleagues, and you can unmute yourself, and we will I will take the question, we'll repeat it, and somebody from our panel will answer it.
And I believe that participants may not have the ability to unmute themselves. So if you want to raise your hand, we can unmute you, or you can put questions in the chat and we can read them from there. Either way, but the raise hand function would be at the bottom under reactions. If you click on that, there's an option to raise your hand.
Everybody should be able to unmute now.
Great, thanks, Shannon.
I think the chat is still disabled though. If
It
you
is.
want people to put questions there.
Okay, Joan, do you have a question?
I don't have a question. I have a big thank you, and I was glad that I was able to make the meeting. I don't think a lot of people at our place could, but I appreciated prior work, and I'm glad to see it moving forward, and I'll definitely share the URL letter. So I don't have a question yet, but thank you.
Great, no worries. Can you not see can you see the chat or no?
It's there now. Now you can.
Perfect, awesome, thanks so much. Joan is one of the leadership, she's in a leadership role at Pediatric Therapy Network, which is a pediatric practice both in Long Beach and in Torrance, and they provide services. They also have a Head Start site, so it's one of an unusual place where they've started. It's a nonprofit, and they can look on their website. They have a lot of support that they provide for preschool on up. Yes, Patricia, the meeting, this is being recorded. And it is, Karen, you might be able to speak to that. Is it going to be posted on the main page on the OTAC web page? We'll answer that. I know that is our intention, is that this recording will be available for as many people as can be. And don't worry, Catherine, I see your hand up, so I'll get to you.
I don't think it'll be on the homepage, Lisa, sorry, but it definitely will be on the OTAC website once I do have to do some editing to the video, and then we will post it on the OTAC website.
Great, thanks so much. Those who have been to OTAC conferences, you've probably seen Shannon running around. She's a familiar plate at the in-person OTAC conferences. So
This is Jennifer Snyder. I saw Diane Mikowski had her hand up for a couple times.
Sure. So Diane, do you want to let us know what your question is and just share with the group, and then we'll be able to answer it?
Okay, I have actually added it to the chat, but what happened is I was going to apply because of my background. I wanted to move into another area. And when I got out to California, I realized I wasn't part of the faculty anymore. And I was going to apply for the Services Credential. And the only thing I could apply for was under orientation and mobility, which is covered in the OT. And I wondered if you knew if other people had done that. Because of COVID, I held up doing that, but it was kind of a step-by-step to get a credential. Do you know if they've approved that before?
Well, we do know of occupational therapists, and our colleague who comes to mind at this time is actually overseeing special education.
Because he feels he can.
That is overseeing special education in Pasadena. She went back to school as an occupational therapist, became a counselor, which had a credential. And so as an occupational therapist, you can hold, depending if you meet those qualifications, you could hold a credential in another area. Again, the CTC has that set of criteria. She had to go back. In her case, she went back to school.
Okay, but if I read it correctly, at least where my training came from, OTs could all get an orientation and mobility because credential under the services condition. But it still makes it difficulty to get the other one.
Yes, we wouldn't qualify as an orientation and mobility instructor.
Okay.
Well, and it seems as though that it's narrowed in what services you could provide possibly under that credential. It says it authorizes the holder to provide services to students who are blind, visually impaired, and deafblind individuals with age-appropriate hands-on experiences.
Okay.
So maybe that's makes that more restrictive.
Yes, exactly.
I'm not saying it's not a valuable need.
No, I agree. It was a way to get a credential that might allow me to explore other areas within education.
Good try, yeah.
Understand. I think it's absolutely, we're open to all input. Catherine, you've been very patient. Tell us what your question is.
Hi, everybody. I appreciate this conversation. It's good to see Rena, who's a classmate of mine. I have been in the school systems for 12 years now, including in Japan, in Germany, Southern California, and now I'm the lead occupational therapist for Berkeley Unified. And I've gone over this issue quite a bit in my head. We were able to do some labor negotiations, so I've been really proud of our role as lead OT in Berkeley. And I'm concerned a bit, purely because while I do want to advance, I have hopes as well of being a program supervisor or a special ed director one day. So I've often felt frustrated with that ceiling. I do wonder about the restrictions it may put as certificated employees. And I'd love to hear more about that. Upon talking to various HR departments, I've been told many times that our pay scale would go down significantly. Currently, the Berkeley Unified classified employees, we are the only ones who have vacation days paid out. We have 23 vacation days a year paid out. Our union is really strong. We're in a classified management union. And that was the same when I worked in Pasadena Unified. Being part of the classified management system was helpful for the pay scale. So I'd just like to hear some more information about how that looks in other school districts, as I recognize that my experience is limited to only a few. But I'd love to hear what you guys have thought about while talking that over, just because a few HR people have really sort of spoken to me about concerns and that we would have to be in a new union and a new pay scale. And in Berkeley, to be quite honest, it's a significant difference in pay. So while I'd want to advance, I want to make sure all OTs are equally benefiting from this initiative. Thank you. Appreciate you guys.
So much. Thank you so much, Catherine. That's a great question. Dr. Dolan and Jennifer, do you want to speak to that?
I can speak to that. And that was a great question. Can I, before I address yours though, Catherine, which was great, go back to Diane's? Because in the, about the orientation and mobility, that falls under the rehabilitative services credential. And if you look on the commission's website, you'll see that it delineates the very specific requirements, and it denotes that you have to have all of those. One of the requirements is that you have to have had the, you have to have completed the commission approved professional preparation program. And I think that is where the glitch is, because the programs that as an occupational therapy practitioner you would have gone to would not fall under that specific selected list. And that's, as I see it, that's my understanding. So
Thank you.
yeah, so just to clarify, you can look into it further. If you learn anything, share with us, but that's my understanding so far. Okay, I just wanted to go back to that real quick, Catherine. Okay, so when it comes to, and I understand what you're saying about a concern regarding a change in pay scale or a change in various systems. So if you do look at the different, well, first of all, let me say this, that every district, every SELPA, they have their own way that they manage pay, salaries. They're all negotiated contracts. And you'll see, if you really, as we've kind of have been, getting information on this, districts do different things with their OTs. In the school system that, I worked in initially, I was a contracted person, not even anywhere on their radar, except to pay as a contracted individual. In another school system, it was as classified management. In other systems, OTs are on a certificated pay scale. Either way, usually what the education system does is they look at your education, your background, and they matriculate that onto their salary schedule accordingly. If you look, for example, at many of the pay scales in districts, and you look at what a school psychologist is being paid, or a speech therapist, what they're being paid, you will often see that they're quite equitable because of the education that they bring to the table. So it's really difficult to narrow it down and say specifically, because every organization kind of does their varied thing. And when it gets into some of the other perks and details, like paid vacation days and things like that, typically, and my research I've done, I've seen that those are all elements that are factored in. So at the end of it all, it usually ferrets out fairly similarly. So I think going forward, those would be conversations that would have to take place. And I don't know, I'm going to reach out to say that it seems unreasonable that they would minimize our value, so there you go.
I'm going to kind of take over now.
Yeah,
and
perfect.
And keep moving things along. So we've got a lot of questions. I'm going to, just to answer it really succinctly, what Aaron said is true. This, having the credential, doesn't get into hiring practices. They are separate, right? So everything about each district being individual and what you bring to the table is all true. Just know that having the credential or not having the credential, and I know some have heard me speak to this, years ago, our associate superintendent for LA Unified was a preschool teacher. She went from certificated to classified. Whether she was one or the other wasn't dependent. They have both, as Aaron said, there's pros and cons. Credentialing initiative or credential, nothing to do with hiring practices. Okay, Miss, let's go to Kimberly. Did we get your question? Your hand's been up for a bit.
Yes, hi everybody. I just posted my question in the chat box, but I know everyone's talked a little bit about this issue from. Yeah, sure.
You want to read what your question is for everybody so they can?
Yes, sure. So given the current restrictions under the clinical/rehabilitative services credential, which credential and credentialing route is recommended at this time that would be most streamlined to obtain that basic credential that will enable subsequent attainment of an administrative credential?
Fantastic question, Kimberly. Jennifer, you want to take this one on?
This is probably an Erin question that's much more because she's experienced this. Erin, if she doesn't mind.
Sure. So one option is under the career technical education pathways. That is one way. That's a fairly straight, if your area offers those pathways for career technical education, but they still require that you do teaching within that that capacity. And other than that, my research has really only pointed to going back and doing a base credential in education as a teaching credential. So that's what I've found.
Great question.
Thank you so
Kimberly.
much.
Sarah, you have a question?
Yes, hi, thank you. I just wanted to share in kind of the opposite experience of Catherine. I'm in Orange County in the Saddleback Valley Unified School District, and we have no union. And I've been told by our union that we're specifically excluded from CSEA, which is one that you mentioned that is opposing this. So I think that, it's been said, but the experience is going to, I think, be so different from district to district. And it's awesome to hear some of that like bargaining power and administrative power that Catherine was speaking about. And in my district, we're severely lacking that.
Yeah, and I think it really, those are concerns that have come up before in terms of it. I can see in the chat in terms of salary, those are where certainly OTAC and we, as I'm one of the co-chairs of this subcommittee, and Dr. Bissell, we can talk about and give guidance, right? How did we get there? How is our pathway in LA Unified? We're credentialed, we are the same salary schedule as school psychologists. How did we get there, right? And what is that path? And what is that data that you need to provide? So I hear that salary is a piece. The credentialing initiative won't change that in terms of those hiring practices. And certainly we would hope that it would certainly open up doors.
Lisa, can I go ahead and read back some of the questions in the chat for you guys to address?
I think I have them.
You have them? Okay,
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, I've got them. So most or some are talking about, so I want to try to get to questions because some are just really kind of reiterating things. Gina, you asked a question in terms of what best way to transition to a school setting if most of your experience is in a SNF. There are some really great courses that talk about pediatric refresher courses that you might take. I think really highlighting sometimes even volunteering a couple hours in a clinic nearby to get some of that pediatric experience, being asked to be mentored. We've got a fantastic crew on here looking at who are colleagues in your area, seeing will someone take you under their wing to mentor you? Those would be suggestions. Susan's iPad 2.
Hi. I was wondering, so I went to school with Lisa, so I am very, very old and have been in OT for a long time, but I've worked in multiple settings. And one of the concerns that have come up in my OT group is that, teachers have a teacher's retirement system, right? And our district tried to push us all into the teacher retirement system, but we've worked in other settings like in CCS, and we would lose our access to Social Security or to the other benefits because the teacher's retirement system doesn't allow that. So those of us that have been around for a while, we've used that. No, we don't have a credential. We don't want to be in that STRS retirement. We want to stay with PERS. Is there any thought about that? Are they going to force us down that route? Because that is a huge thing. As an OT, we work across, in a lot of different settings. I would hate to lose access to those other retirement systems.
Sure. So you'll see on the that there is a website. If you go to, you can remain. So if you look at the STRS and the PERS website, there is a process to be able to remain in one, or depending, we have some people that are just beginning their careers here, be able to transfer those benefits from one retirement system to another. And there, as people have said, right, there's so many benefits of each system, right? And it's so hard kind of comparing, you know, are we comparing apples to apples or apples to oranges? I'm part of STRS. There's a lot of benefits there. So you have that ability, look on those websites. They have an FAQ that speaks to that. So hopefully that helps. Mary Lee Bell, you have your hand.
Hi there. Yes, just in terms of that, I did know somebody who, a teacher actually, who she started out as an instructional assistant and was on the classified, and she stayed in classified. She stayed in the other. I can't think right now. Sorry, I've been sick. Bargaining unit. So she was able to maintain. She didn't have to switch over to the certificated one. And then I also wanted to mention that I don't know if people are aware of this, and I don't know if this is how it's been for everyone, but for us where we work, I've been a school-based OT for 20 years. Our number of days are often, you know, more than what the teachers work or the speech therapists work. Sometimes the same, but we do not receive a full year of service credit for those same number of days. So that's really something to look at. It adds up over time, and it really affects you at the end in retirement. So just wanted to make that note.
Okay, and we looked into that, and we could probably speak to that after. You could look at that. I know that had come up for some people that were, for instance, some of our staff maybe that are part-time, right there, you don't earn enough days per year, but there should be that process. And I know we did, I'm not sure which area you are, but I know there were some concerns from clinicians in the Monterey area. I'm not sure. Jennifer, do you remember how that was? It came up about 2 years ago, how we resolved that?
Only to the extent that I think it's important for everybody to understand that, you know, we see this as a concern. And so part of our request in the CTC looking at credentialing is to also make sure that it doesn't adversely impact an OT to obtain a credential. We do know for sure that it won't impact anybody's choice with what retirement system they are in or choose to be in, if there is a credential, you know, a credential requirement. But it is very different depending sometimes on the school district, how OTs are categorized or not, it sounds like, you know. So it is definitely the intent of the association to make sure that, you know, we can do everything possible to that this is a benefit for OTs. It certainly should not be a detriment. So that was really what we had hoped would be part of the conversation with the CTC, and that's, you know, what we continue to ask to be part of that dialogue. But Lisa, I don't know how that particular, whether or not we solved that particular local issue.
Yeah.
I don't know if we could.
Okay, no worries with that. I mean, there's so many different pieces of the puzzle, and kind of underscoring from all of this, how do we ensure, right, that we protect what members have, but then allowing and providing opportunities that our colleagues have, right? As Rena mentioned, that lateral shift, and she can even speak to more on a personal level what she's seen as some of those barriers. Mary Lee, I think we answered your question. Sarah, we answered your. Marcy, have we haven't answered your question?
Hi, well, I'm just curious, kind of from a global perspective, and this might be for Jennifer. What is the likelihood? How are you feeling about this going through based upon precedents that you've seen?
I think if we continue to be tenacious, we will have success. I think as I mentioned earlier, we continue to be in the middle of a rock and a hard place. And, I first want to clarify that we would not want to portray that the School Employees Association is opposed to this idea. They are supportive of the idea, they just have a different approach, right? So that's what we're caught between a rock and a hard place. We have these two different, constituency groups that believe in a very different approach. And so we hope that if there is an involvement from the entity that actually deals with the credentialing and can bring those folks together to figure out what that compromise will be, we'll have success. But I mean, to be honest, it has been an uphill climb and it will continue to be an uphill climb. And for the reason of, we're in the middle of two very powerful unions that have a different opinion about how the solution should be.
And thank you so much for that. And that's really why we want to have this. It has been a little while with COVID and pieces. And so certainly we can see even by the participants here, we're going to need to have another town hall prior to even when we meet with the CTC in June. So we want to make sure we can answer everyone's questions. I know Jason had asked, what associations do we have support of? We do have the Language and Speech Association, and we have other stakeholders that are in support of us. So we do have those. And then I think one of the pieces that we all have to, and that's what we really hope, is to be able to have on OTAC accurate information. As Jennifer said, some of us are part of unions, some of us are not, but also to make sure what the information the unions are giving is accurate and true. So just be wise in that information. We do know that some of the information that was published before was inaccurate. And so we want to make sure the role of OTAC is to make sure we provide all the information so sound decisions can be made. And the hope is that then there will be a work group formed to be able to feather out some of the issues. Could someone be grandfathered in? Is it optional? Marilee, we answered, is your hand still up for a new question or you just haven't raised it down?
I just haven't raised it down, sorry.
No, we're just making sure. Catherine, I think I spoke to your question. Audra had a question: when OTAC and CPTA resume advocacy on the Assembly bill, will it continue as AB 2386 as it was written?
Answer to that question, it would be similar. I mean, it depends. It depends on our success with the commission. I mean, the bill as it was written required the CTC to do what we're asking them to do, and where they don't need a legislative vehicle to do. So part of it will depend on whether or not in this current year there's some success in convincing the CTC to convene a group that will really answer, I mean, a lot of the questions that were raised tonight about, a lot of the questions that were raised tonight. So that's the hope. If that's the case, then possibly the legislation, if needed, would be more explicit about what the credential would be required and not the task force approach that we've had in the past.
Right. There was a question earlier, kind of two-part questions, right? Is this something that OTAs are eligible for? And then, so I'll start with that. Aaron, do you want to speak to that, or Rena?
Well, currently under the current services credentials requirements, OTAs would not be eligible because it requires a minimum of a bachelor's plus the 5th year. So we're looking at this primarily for OTs at this moment. Does anyone know?
Oh, perfect. And then the other piece, we don't see this as, I mean, we really see this as one of the questions that Patricia had. Do we see this as school districts are going to hire more OTAs in terms of not having OTRs, or if I wasn't quite, Patricia, do you want to try to ask your question? Because it wasn't really a question. What's your specific question? Patricia Polson, colleague.
I was just listing some of the apprehension that fellow OTs have expressed every time I bring up credentialing. There's so many unanswered questions, and I know that's because it's still evolving and we don't have solid answers. But they look at it, some of the therapists have looked at it in more of a negative light, and a lot of concerns about if they're going to have to go back to school, or it's going to cost them money, or they'll be required to join a union, or they're not going to have jobs because districts will hire quotas instead of OTRs. So, all of those things that I'm sure all of you that have worked so hard on this initiative have heard over and over and over again. And I think until there's more answers to those everyday questions for the everyday therapist, we've got to get better backing on this statewide. There's too many of OTs not on the bandwagon yet.
Sure. So that's what we're trying to do here with this and try to raise that piece. I want to just, in the sake of time, I know Victoria has a question. Let me just answer. Amy, is there a lobbyist to represent OTAC on this bill? We've had Rubio has been our person who has supported, authored the prior bills. I believe that would be our first choice in going through. Currently, there's not a bill, right? We're working to be on the agenda, and then we'll see what then those next steps are. So the first step is having that conversation with the CTC to say, look, we have a problem here. What is the solution to this? Victoria, you had your hand raised.
Yes, just wondering if there's any ideas on how this would affect contracted OTs that are working in school systems.
Okay, it looks like I will take that answer. We don't anticipate, this isn't something that would, it wouldn't affect contracted OTs. This is something that as typically it's part of, and then again, it depends if it's optional or not optional. Let's say that it's not optional. As an employee of a school district, then you would be required to have this credential. As a contractor, you're not an employee of the school district. And I'm so sorry because I misanswered the question. Thank you, Dr. Edwards, for clarifying. Yes, Jennifer, who's on the call, is our lobbyist with OTAC, and she's with Capital Advocacy. And so she is I was looking at who's our prior author of that bill.
Just not appreciated or recognized. That's the
Oh my goodness. Well, on behalf of all of us, on behalf of Dr. Katrick and Jennifer Snyder and Dr. Dolan, myself, Shannon and Karen, who are behind the scenes, and Dr. Bissell, who's behind the scenes, we thank you. We will hold another town hall. Look for that. We can see that there's a lot of questions. We'll look through the chat after and really try to target those questions that are here that we weren't able to answer. So thank you all for your time. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And be sure that you utilize that letter. I think the link is in the chat. So that everyone's voice can be heard.
Absolutely. And OTAC will send out an e-blast too, when we'll target, we recognize many of the people on here, and trust us that we really underscore, we have everyone's benefit, and OTAC is supporting all of us as practitioners to make this a win-win for everybody. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks for sharing it. Thanks, Michelle. Oh, Marilee, I like her little, yay.
Great. Well, thank you, Shannon and Jennifer and Rena and Karen and Aaron. We'll loop back. And it seems like, I mean, it's May, early May. It seems like early June we'll need to do, have an updated town hall.
Yeah, that would be good.
Sounds good.
Looking forward
Thank
to
you.
it.
Thank
Bye.
you,
Bye,
everybody.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.